5,000 years ago, the first Saint Su Lian Xiuer rebelled against the will of the gods, intending to steal the power of the gods. Eventually, she was cursed by the gods and fell into the category of the Primordial Witch. Since then, the word witch has become a taboo that cannot be mentioned. 5,000 years later, the adventurer Li Xun finally became a glorious witch hunter through his own efforts. I thought I would end up with a golden rice bowl and be happy to eat and die. But who would have thought that after 5,000 years of fighting, the god of truth suddenly came to an end, and the Witch of Genchu won. Oh, now we should respectfully call her the Witch of Truth. No, the goddess of truth is crowned below. Those who disrespect the gods will surely be punished by the goddess. Keywords of the novel. Witch hunter from beginner to unemployment, no pop-ups. Witch hunter from beginner to unemployment, complete collection download. Witch hunter from beginner to unemployment, latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Divine Selection Ceremony. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Divine Selection Ceremony. The great goddess of the stars and the moon, you are the merciful and compassionate God. Your compassion fills the entire starry sky, and you will eventually lead us lost lambs into the paradise of eternal happiness. The great goddess of the stars and moon, we pray here, begging for your attention, begging for your mercy, begging for your bestowal of our great divine power. What supplicant? The bitter taste came from his mouth. Li Xun could not help but roast in his heart, and then he opened his eyes in some confusion. Who am I, where am I, and where is this place? It was not the dark and gloomy gathering place of the cultists as expected, but Li Xun found himself in a luxurious and brightly decorated hall. In the center of the hall is a white jade statue, which is a graceful female statue with a compassionate expression on her face. She opens her hands forward, seemingly embracing the struggling beings in the mortal world. Just staring at the statue for a few moments, Li Xun felt that his whole person had been purified, his soul had been sublimated, and his body began to emit a temperament similar to that statue. If there was a word to describe it, it was divinity. That is a genuine statue of a deity, or rather, it is the deity itself. The gentle deity is observing everyone in this hall through this statue. There are many people in the hall, most of whom are young boys and girls, dressed in white religious robes adorned with golden stars, kneeling devoutly on the ground. Li Xun realized that he was also one of these people, and he also knelt on the ground praying to the statue or deity. It's just that he's in a corner of the church, and his attire is not the kind of white robe painted with stars, which has a religious significance, but an ordinary white robe. It is obvious that in terms of identity and status, I am not comparable to those who are obviously experienced believers. Is this a time travel for oneself? Looking down at his hands, Li Xun confirmed this fact. This body is very young, probably not over 20 years old, and seems to exercise regularly. In terms of physical fitness, it may be much better than oneself who used to be a social animal. Not bad, this religion seems to have a normal art style, at least it's not a cult gathering. Li Xun quickly accepted the fact that his sudden death due to overtime caused him to travel through time. After all, there was no place to leave in the world of the past. My parents left early, my relatives didn't make any contact, and I didn't have a girlfriend in my 30s either. I'm completely alone, so I guess suddenly disappearing shouldn't be sad, right? Why do I suddenly feel sad? Now is obviously not the time to hurt spring and feel autumn. Li Xun began to work hard to dig up the memories of the original owner. He must understand the current situation in order to play his current identity well. After all, when it comes to religion, the original owner is a religious figure, so doctrine is very important. He doesn't want to be seen as heretical because of his strange behavior or ignorance of doctrine. At that moment, a cry of surprise rang out, and Li Xun looked around in surprise. He found that all the young boys and girls who looked like believers had widened their eyes, staring closely at the statue in the center of the hall. What happened again? Li Xun was curious and then noticed a dazzling light flickering on the statue. Before he could react, the light completely engulfed him. And those extremely excited and surprised young boys and girls stared at the corner where Li Xun was, their faces full of disbelief. What's going on? Who is he? Why did the goddess choose him, and why is that? What a joke, how can a sinner get the divine curtain? Angry voices rang out from the hall, and someone recognized the identity of the boy wrapped in light, which made them feel particularly angry. Because of his identity, he should not be qualified to step into this hall of audience and participate in this divine selection ceremony. He was a sinner, and all of his parents died by blood in a ritual offering to an evil god. It was only because he was still in his infancy at the time that his crimes were pardoned. Due to the belief in the compassionate goddess of the stars and moon, most of the death penalty has long been abolished in the Star Kingdom. The life of a cultist is also life, let alone a baby in swaddling clothes. He knows something and should not bear any responsibility for this sacrificial ceremony. Based on the above reasons, this young man finally regained his life and was able to grow up under the supervision of the Star Moon Church. Although the crime was pardoned theoretically, the young man was not a criminal. In the eyes of many people, his body was still full of stains, and even in front of the gods, it was a form of disrespect. Now, a sinner has gained the attention of the gods during the selection ceremony and become a member of the divine family, which naturally angers these self-proclaimed devout believers. Our faith is so firm, and we are so devout to the goddess. Why don't you take a look at me, goddess? Why favor that sinner? Li Xun had no idea about the situation in the hall, otherwise he would have exclaimed, the joys and sorrows of humanity are not interconnected, he only feels that they are noisy. In fact, he was also in a panic now. He found himself still in the hall, but not a single person around him could see. The pure white mist drifted in the hall, making everything around it look somewhat unreal. From various signs, it seems that I have been targeted by that divine adult. What should she do? She won't see anything wrong with her soul, will she? This is a deity. If she loses her followers, will she destroy herself? Don't be nervous, my child. A gentle voice sounded, instantly eliminating the tense emotions in Li Xun's heart. He looked in the direction of the sound, and the white jade statue that was originally in front of him was gone, replaced by a gentle lady. She stood there, her gaze doting on herself, as if looking at her own child. She is so gentle and kind, and all the beautiful adjectives in the world seem unable to describe her appropriately. For a moment, Li Xun thought of his mother, and without realizing it, tears flowed down his eyes. I have been waiting for you for a long time, my child. Li Xun couldn't help but step forward and gradually approached the hazy figure. The latter smiled slightly, opened his hands, and embraced him in his arms like a truly kind mother. Li Xun couldn't help but close his eyes, and a peaceful expression appeared on his face, as if he had returned to his mother's body as a child. This beautiful scene lasted for a moment. Just as Li Xun felt his soul gradually sublimating, the woman hugging him slowly spoke up. My child, can you tell me what eternal happiness is? P.S. A long-lost new book, almost forgetting my account, end of this chapter. Chapter 2. Eternal Happiness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Eternal Happiness. What is eternal happiness? I think being in your arms is quite happy. If you can take me to your divine kingdom, then it will probably be eternal happiness. Li Xun had already begun to contemplate the possibility of embracing the thigh of the deity and then ascending to the sky step by step. But soon, he also calmed down and realized that there is no love for no reason in this world. In front of me was a deity, and I was a bit too bold to just grab it. Okay, actually she took the initiative to hug herself. However, this goddess of the stars and moon seems to be honored as the god of mercy, benevolence, and supreme good, so the love she gives is unfounded. Don't be nervous or burdened. I have asked many people such questions, just express your thoughts, my child. I think these are actually two questions, what is eternity and what is happiness? The goddess of the stars and moon remained silent, just looking down at the young man in her arms with an encouraging expression in her eyes. This posture made Li Xun slightly uncomfortable, and he realized that it wasn't because he was too short, but because his goddess was already tall holding him. The life of an ordinary person is too short. As an ordinary person, it is difficult for me to say what eternity is. If we look at it from the perspective of an ordinary person, the sun, moon, stars above our heads, and the earth below our feet are eternal. No matter how time flies and changes, they will never change. I thought you would say, the gods are eternal. Your Highness the Goddess should have heard many such answers before. I have to say something different to leave a deep impression on the goddess. Moreover, if the gods are truly eternal, the goddess does not need to seek the answer to this question. There is nothing eternal in this world, even the sun has a day when it will go out. In a somewhat melancholic tone, the goddess of the stars and moon said these words. Li Xun blinked and inexplicably felt that this goddess had a human touch. Perhaps it is precisely because of this that she has become the god of kindness, love, and goodness in people's mouths. Why does the goddess pursue eternal happiness? Will the gods also feel unhappy? I want humanity. No, I want all living beings to be free from pain, sadness, and troubles, and obtain eternal happiness. Ah, what hell is not empty, vowing not to become a Buddha? Do gods from other worlds have such consciousness? Li Xun didn't know what to say at all, because it was obvious that the idea of the goddess of stars and moon was not realistic. Desire is endless, and Li Xun is too clear about the essence of the human species. As for intelligent beings outside of humanity, since they have developed civilization, their essence is the same. The race that is willing to dedicate and sacrifice itself will obviously only live itself as an endangered species. Pointing directly at the grand wish of the deity, it was impossible, obviously a bit arrogant. Li Xun pondered and combined it with many religious sayings he had heard in his previous life, and spoke up. Because there are too many desires, it is painful and troublesome. If everyone can let go of their desires, and if the whole world can become absolutely fair and just, the troubles and pains will definitely be reduced a lot. What strange things are you talking about? What is redemption in this life and blessings in the next life? Li Xun couldn't help but cover his face with his hand, while the goddess fell silent. Li Xun couldn't see the other person's face clearly, and when he looked up, he could only see a hazy and beautiful shadow. She seemed to be pondering, as if determining the possibility of Li Xun's words. That, goddess, I'm just casually saying it. For everyone, happiness is different, and it's obvious that there can't be a unified standard for this thing. Don't be nervous, my child. I just want to learn more about your thoughts, after all, it concerns your entire ethnic group. The deity spoke softly, revealing unparalleled tenderness. Li Xun couldn't help but sigh, where could he find such a good god? Go, my child. I bless you and wish you a smooth and colorful life from now on. The voice gradually became hazy and illusory, and Li Xun found that everything in front of him had become blurry. In a daze, he felt a kiss fall on his forehead, and then some noble force poured into his body. Rosalind, we need an explanation. When Li Xun regained his senses, he heard such an angry voice. The attendants in the hall looked at the woman standing in front of Li Xun in unison. Compared to the young people around her, this woman was obviously much more mature. She has long light golden hair and a proud figure that cannot be concealed by a spacious robe. The pure white robe outlines a graceful curve on her body. She seemed completely unaware of the chaos in the hall, and the woman still knelt devoutly in place, facing the statue with her hands clasped together in devout prayer. Her face wore a pitiful expression, and just looking at it made people feel pity and wanted to soothe the sadness between her eyebrows and eyes. Just looking at each other, many young attendants blushed with embarrassment. Li Xun's expression was also somewhat strange. He had already gained many memories about the original owner and also knew the identity of the woman in front of him. Rosalind, in the name of the Holy See, established an orphanage and is considered her guardian. Rosalind, you brought this culprit. Aren't you planning to explain something? Is there any difference between whether he comes or not here? Everything is the will of the gods, and when the gods cast their gaze, the person she gazes at will receive the blessings of the gods no matter where they are. What we serve is the radiance of the goddess. This is the hall of audience, and the goddess still gazes at it. If we lose our composure because we were not selected, it would be a bit unsightly. What qualifications do you have to say such things, someone who has participated in 5 divine selection ceremonies? You are the most annoyed one, right? You were taken away by a sinner, you raised yourself as a divine survivor. Are you regretting not killing him when he was a child? Rosalind has participated in 5 divine selection ceremonies, which are held every 3 years. Only young, pure, and devout believers are eligible to participate in this ceremony. Most people only have the qualification to participate once, while a few with outstanding qualifications have the qualification to participate twice, while those like Rosalind who participate 5 times have almost no precedent. The selection of divine attendants needs to be stricter. Rosalind was not angry or irrational because of it. She just stood up and spoke calmly, then looked at the seemingly distinguished young man with a pitiful gaze. The aristocratic young man from a privileged family never received such contempt, and immediately pointed at Rosalind and cursed angrily. You scumbag who used dirty means to get qualified through the back door, you. This guy is so annoying. Can you make him shut up? Li Xun thought impatiently, and then the words of the aristocratic youth standing in front of him suddenly came to an end. He felt as if he had been hit hard by something invisible out of thin air. He spat out his blood and flew backwards, hitting several benches and hitting the wall on the other side of the hall. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Praise the Goddess. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Praise the Goddess. Well, did Rosalind take action? Watching the aristocratic youth transform into an artistic hanging painting in a second, Li Xun thought to himself and then found Rosalind staring at him with a surprised expression. Not only did she, but the other attendants in the hall also looked at him with somewhat fearful eyes. In the reflection in the woman's eyes, Li Xun saw his current appearance. The golden radiance flowed out of his eyes, reflecting his immense solemnity and authority. Control your mind well, don't casually release hostility towards others. Those here are ordinary people, and just one thought from you could potentially kill them. Really, I heard you have some opinions about me. Turning his head to look at the guys who had just made a particularly loud noise, Li Xun grinned with a malicious smile. With a crash, the young boys and girls took a step back in unison, their faces also showing signs of fear. The former sinner in front of me has now transformed into a divine being, which is a completely different existence from them. Even though most of them here are nobles, they dare not offend Li Xun. The so-called divine relatives are the spokespersons of the gods. Disrespect towards the divine is disrespect towards the gods. In this kingdom where divine power is paramount, such guilt is clearly not something that everyone can bear. Rosalind looked at Li Xun with a complex expression as he boasted in front of these young girls. This somewhat introverted young man, after becoming a divine companion, immediately swept away his previous dullness and became proud and confident. Although she told herself in her heart that she was serving the radiance of the goddess, rather than yearning for the power bestowed upon her by the goddess, the repeated neglect by the god still made this devout believer feel a bit uncomfortable. She doesn't crave the power bestowed by the goddess, she just hopes that the goddess's gaze can be directed towards her and receive her affirmation. The tightly closed door of the hall was pushed open, and a group of men dressed in white robes walked in. The leading man's gaze swept around solemnly before finally stopping at Li Xun. It was evident that he, like Rosalind, had a somewhat complex expression, but soon he restrained the emotions on his face and spoke slowly. The divine selection ceremony has ended, and your devout faith has been well conveyed to the goddess. Congratulations, you have become the one under the gaze of the gods. You, along with Rosalind, come with me. Yes, Your Excellency. Rosalind respectfully responded, while Li Xun curled his lips while holding both hands. Are you polite? You don't even want to shout my name. What is your name? 18 years of life is really too long, and the memories that Li Xun has obtained are not the kind of complete and comprehensive memories. He pondered for a moment, then awkwardly realized that he didn't seem to have a name. Because his background involves a top powerful figure in this country, according to the idea of that powerful figure at the time, he was going to be eradicated and the only survivor was also killed. With the strong support of the judges who handled the sacrificial incident of the evil god, I finally regained a small life. By the way, Rosalind was one of the judges of the time. Due to his sponsorship, he was also disciplined. Rosalind was also very individualistic and decisively withdrew from the trial court, abandoning her relatively prestigious status in the Vatican and going to open an orphanage. Practice the teachings of the goddess in one's own way. But when we calculate it this way, Rosalind is at least 40 or 50 years old, isn't she? I can't tell at all. I secretly looked at the mature woman beside me, and it seemed that time had not left any trace on her. She was in the most beautiful years of a woman, like a blooming rose, emitting breathtaking beauty. As he watched, Li Xun's gaze involuntarily moved downwards. Then he couldn't help but mutter. What a great evil. What are you talking about? It's nothing, I'm thinking that since I've become a goddess's lover now, I must reform and not let go of any evil in the future. Don't think so much, it's not your sin. You don't need to worry about it, and you're not evil either. No one can choose their birth, as long as you walk the right path in your future life. You see, you have gained the recognition of the goddess, which indicates that you have never committed any sins. You don't have to worry about being judged, you can continue living with peace of mind. A gentle expression appeared on her face, and Rosalind comforted the young man in front of her. Everyone feels that his existence is a stain, and the nobles of the royal capital are trying their best to erase this stain. Some fanatics in the Vatican also feel that his existence is a blasphemy against the goddess. In fact, the reason why she brought him to participate in this divine selection ceremony today is to beg for the protection of the goddess of the stars and moon, and to beg the gods to save this poor child. After all, he is already 18 years old, and some people's patience has reached its limit. They clamored to bring the sinners to their rightful trial. However, there was a slight deviation from what she had expected. According to her plan, she was to gain the recognition of the goddess and become a divine ally, and then protect this young man as a divine ally. But now, the other party has become a divine ally. Thinking of this, Rosalind's breath couldn't help but quicken a bit, and as she looked at the young man in front of her, her expression became particularly melancholic. There is naturally no possibility of the identity of the divine being taken away, and this idea is disrespectful to the gods, but Rosalind still has some difficulty in appeasing it. This is my persistence that has lasted for more than 20 years. I aspire to become the most loyal believer of the goddess and her lover from a sensible age. On the other hand, Li Xun also broke out in a cold sweat. He naturally knew how awkward his situation was. In the Kingdom of Stars, due to faith in goddesses, most of the death penalty is abolished, except for a series of crimes, which are blasphemy against the gods. The cultists have been discovered, and most of them are executed without running away. Even if it's not the death penalty, it's the end of life imprisonment. Coincidentally, Li Xun was a genuine cult believer. In the eyes of the ignorant masses, he performed a ritual of summoning evil gods and sacrificed his entire family's lives. As for what, at that time Li Xun was just a baby in swaddling clothes. Who said babies can't be sacrificed by blood? Maybe they were supported by evil gods from birth. In this world where gods exist, everything is possible. Fortunately, now he has the protection of a true god, and the favor of the goddess of the stars and moon is more than 1,000 words. Praise the goddess. He gestured his palm and pretended to draw a cross on his chest, and Li Xun sighed from the bottom of his heart. P.S. The title of the book has been harmonized and cut off. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Names and New Life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Names and New Life. Li Xun followed Rosalind and the two walked along the long corridor. This is the largest church of the Starry Moon Church in Blue Lake City, managed by Priest Richard. In addition to his priest, there are over 100 people in the entire church, including nuns, deacons, judges, attendants, and guardian knights. When Li Xun and Rosalind walked along, they endured countless lines of inquiry, most of which were not friendly. It is obvious that, just like the attendants who attended the divine selection ceremony in the hall just now, most people are not convinced that Li Xun, a sinner, has become a favored one. It may seem that the kingdom of stars is a divine power supremacy, but a deity who is too gentle and easy to speak naturally appears somewhat lacking in authority. Even the identity of a divine ally may have become something that can be negotiated. Recalling the young girls and boys in the hall just now, he had an impression of many people, the vast majority of whom were noble children of Blue Lake City. Perhaps their qualifications to participate in this divine selection ceremony were also purchased with money. Don't pay attention to their gaze, you have already embarked on a completely different path from them. A palm fell on his head, and as he looked at Rosalind's gentle and kind gaze, Li Xun felt a bit uncomfortable. In my memory, the relationship between the original owner and the nun in front of me was not very good either. A young man without a single name, known as a sinner, can be imagined how dull and unremarkable his childhood was. Although Rosalind paid a considerable price to save his life and give him freedom, she did not give him any additional care beyond that. From Li Xun's perspective, Rosalind was naturally benevolent and righteous. In order to save a better child that most people thought died, she sacrificed her reputation and her bright future. But what can an ordinary child understand? He only knows that the whole world has rejected him, he is a sinner of blasphemy. Although Rosalind established an orphanage, she rarely interacted with these children and naturally did not notice the increasingly serious psychological problems of the original owner. She has already worked hard to do her best in terms of material things, but spiritual poverty is unavoidable. Oh, that's not right. With faith, it can't be said to be barren, but it has nothing to do with the original owner, because the original owner is a sinner who worships evil gods. In this kingdom where divine power is supreme, even a slight thought of it can make Li Xun feel the despair in the original owner's heart. That's also why the other party would choose to take starry moon grass and commit suicide in front of the statue of the goddess of stars and moon. This is the source of bitterness in Li Xun's mouth when he woke up before. Star moon grass, a special spice used to worship the goddess of stars and moon, has a certain degree of toxicity. This kind of toxicity may not be considered significant for people with extraordinary powers, but it is deadly enough for ordinary people. Maybe if you persist for a while, you will be selected by the goddess. Li Xun sighed softly in his heart, looking back on the tragic and desperate life of the original owner. He doesn't want to immerse himself in the other person's life, and the latter doesn't have any obsession. Death may be a kind of liberation for him. So from now on, this is his brand new life. My name. Hey. What? Rosalind was momentarily stunned, then looked at the young man in front of her and looked at her with a very unfamiliar gaze. The woman's expression was somewhat dazed, but in fact, she didn't see the other person many times. For most of the time in her memory, this dull and gloomy young man didn't even dare to look at himself in the eye, let alone talk to him. I actually have no understanding of him at all. At this moment, a faint golden radiance lingered around his eyes, and some noble power surrounded the young man, reflecting him as if he were a deity. Rosalind realized that the boy in front of her had changed completely. He was a person favored by the gods and a spokesperson for the gods walking on earth. You are not qualified to obtain power. Pursuing the path of transcendence is a blasphemy against the gods. That is an abyss, an irreversible path that cannot be turned back. What you should serve is the radiance of the goddess, not the longing for the power bestowed by her. The words of the guide who led her back then rang in her ears, and Rosalind's face showed a look of regret. She ultimately couldn't resist the temptation, perhaps that's why the goddess didn't turn her gaze to her for a long time. Goddess above, please forgive the sins I bear. Taking a deep breath, she silently prayed in her heart, and then Rosalind looked at Li Xun's apologetic expression. I'm sorry, regarding your name, it's a protection for you. You know, even now, the people of that family are still watching you. If you let them know that you have become a divine companion and immediately use that family's name, no one knows what they will do. Who wants that strange family name? I mean, I should have a name that belongs to me, right? I'm already 18 years old and of age. I used to be called a sinner every day, but now that I've become a god, I can't let others call me a sinner, can I? Li Xun laughed, and the inexplicable sense of oppression on his body also disappeared, to the point where Rosalind's face showed a dazed expression, feeling that the sense of awe that had just risen in his heart was just like his own illusion. Although Li Xun appeared very carefree, as if he didn't care about everything in the past, Rosalind still felt a bit guilty because it was her responsibility. Although she has opened an orphanage and adopted many children, it is obvious that she is not a qualified mother. In terms of cultivating children's growth, it can be said to be a mess. The children she adopted in the early days all had more or less personality problems. Later, when the orphanage got back on track and she had more helpers, she also hired professional teachers, and the situation gradually improved. Moreover, changing her name was also considered a major event. She ultimately did not adopt Li Xun, so she did not have the qualification to change his name. She thought that as time passed and the impact of that incident passed, the child would be able to use their original name normally. Who would have thought that after so many years, those nobles still hold their grudges and stare at this child relentlessly? If you want to give yourself a name, then naturally there's no problem. You should also have a name, so what kind of name do you want? Just call me Sun Hao, this will be my name from now on. There is no surname Li in this world, but the meaning of the search is similar, and the single character name is not abrupt, even appearing very fashionable. Searching. Searching can represent a short period of time, but it also means finding oneself and the past. Sure enough, you still haven't been able to completely let go. Rosalind quickly thought of the meaning behind the other person's name, and her face also showed a worried expression. She knew she must do a good job as a guide and resolve the hatred in the child's heart, so that he wouldn't go astray in revenge. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. This child lacks love from a young age. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. This child lacks love from a young age. Remember, Rosalind's mother. If you don't call my name again in the future, I will be angry. Don't make such a joke casually. Mother's identity is sacred, how can she be so casual? Rosalind, who had always looked mature and steady, seemed a bit awkward as she stuttered and retorted. I really wanted to express my stance strongly, but looking at Li Xun's appearance, I was afraid that my words would hurt the other party. So much so that she could only stand in place helplessly, feeling a bit at a loss just because of Li Xun's joke. Is it because Rosalind must remain pure? Li Xun blinked and suddenly remembered something. To become a divine companion, one must maintain purity. There is actually no clear explanation of what purity specifically refers to, but it should generally be a comprehensive purity. From the body to the soul, from materialism to idealism. Becoming a mother, even if it's just adopting a child, is not pure in terms of soul and other people's cognition. No, I'm already an impure person who pursues power. I just feel like I don't have the qualifications to be a mother. Rosalind said this and looked at Li Xun with an apologetic expression on her face. Well, it's not your fault for those past events, how can we say it? If it were in the past world, Li Xun would definitely not hesitate to say that religion is a cancer. Making these children in orphanages believe in religion from an early age is a spiritual torment and torment to them. But in a world where this deity really exists and even protects people, he obviously can't say it. And this deity is so enlightened. Look at the goals of other deities and strive for the eternal happiness of all beings. Not to mention, Li Xun is still a divine benefactor now. As a vested interest, speaking of religion here is not good, and there is a feeling of holding a bowl to eat and cursing his mother when he puts it down. After all, Rosalind's mother is just a person with her own pursuits and life. You can't take care of every child comprehensively. What kind of path they will eventually take is still up to them. No matter what the outcome is, Rosalind's mother doesn't have to blame herself for it. Everyone said this title, don't say it casually. Although the title Li Xun carries a hint of humor, Rosalind still appears a bit nervous. Fortunately, there were not many people nearby, and no one heard their conversation. It doesn't matter if you shout privately. There will be a lot of trouble, but if you really want to use this title. Rosalind sighed softly, but ultimately agreed to Li Xun's title, as she owed the child a lot. Li Xun seemed a bit embarrassed, he was just joking, but Rosalind did indeed have that maternal temperament. Moreover, her actions all along make it no problem for her to be the mother of all the children in the orphanage. However, the other party seemed to have deliberately avoided this from happening. As the founder of the orphanage, he kept a distance from the children, if not at all. It is unknown whether it is just to maintain one's own purity or for other reasons. Rosalind is not the kind of person who can't let go of her figure. She left the Vatican and established an orphanage alone, which is enough to prove that she must have some other grievances, right? Li Xun thought curiously, while Rosalind thought more. In her eyes, there was no doubt that Li Xun's current behavior was eager to prove his child after gaining strength. It's not about good or evil, nor is it about showing off. It's just for you to see. I can also achieve this level, and I will be recognized. I am also excellent, so now I can be your child and call you mom. Rosalind suddenly felt a heavy burden on herself, all of which was her own fault. If she had paid close attention to the child's inner problems. Now, he has suddenly gained such powerful power and the status of a divine companion. Without proper guidance, he is likely to go astray. So let yourself make up for his missing childhood and maternal love. Li Xun didn't even know that he had become a problem child who was extremely lacking in love and eager for recognition in Rosalind's eyes. The two of them entered the room at the end of the corridor and came to the priest Richard of Blue Lake City Cathedral. Firstly, I am pleased to witness that you have become a divine companion. You have proven through practice that there is no sin in you, and you are still favored by the gods. Although Richard's expression was somewhat complicated, the sincerity in his eyes was genuine, and he was indeed happy for Li Xun. After all, it is the city he is responsible for that has produced a divine companion, which will also add a few highlights to his resume. Blue Lake City does indeed need a divine companion, as it has been 30 years since a divine companion appeared here. A divine benefactor has emerged here, and Blue Lake City can also receive more attention from the Vatican headquarters, with more funds available for allocation. You should know that the Blue Lake City Church has over 100 people to support, and the cost of Rosalind's orphanage is also quite high. Richard provided funding for Rosalind, naturally with the idea of investing in the other party. Unfortunately, after 15 years and 5 divine selection ceremonies, the other party was unable to become a divine ally. Fortunately, the child raised by the other party has become a divine benefactor, and this investment can be considered a gain. It's not easy thinking this way. Richard also gave Rosalind a resentful glance. The latter, on the other hand, slightly awkwardly lowers its head and awkwardly opens its mouth. I've disappointed you, Reverend Richard. I won't attend any more divine selection ceremonies in the future. Have you given up? Won't you hold on any longer? Richard instinctively advised, feeling a bit regretful. When it comes to devout faith, Rosalind is definitely the most devout believer to the goddess he has seen in all these years. Even Richard himself has a lot of selfishness when he asks himself. He wants to climb up and gain more power and status. I don't want to continue staying in the ordinary medium-sized city of Blue Lake City. I want to go to the core area of the kingdom and work in more prosperous big cities. Even if one wants to go further and become one of the 7 archbishops. No, as long as you have a devout heart, it's the same no matter where you are. Not all divine beings were born in the audience hall of a cathedral. Some small churches, even places without churches, have also given birth to divine beings. The goddess's loving gaze has been fixed on every corner of the kingdom. Well, it's good if you can figure it out. Richard nodded lightly and didn't say anything more. He looked at the woman in front of him who had once shone brightly and needed to be looked up to. Now, she had slowly disappeared from the crowd and become ordinary, looking like an ordinary nun. Many people, including him, cannot understand the other party's choices back then, thinking that it was foolish for her to give up her future for a sinner. Fortunately, time proved everything, and the goddess's favor ultimately descended on her devout followers in another way. Perhaps this is the goddess's reward for devout believers, right? End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Sprinkling Salt on Wounds. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Sprinkling Salt on Wounds. I have informed the Vatican headquarters of the news of the birth of the divine relatives. Generally speaking, all divine relatives will go to the main court located in the royal capital to meet with the Pope. Afterwards, the Pope will also arrange your position. Perhaps next time, you will also be a priest spreading blessings for the goddess. Do you have to go? Subconsciously, Li Xun felt a resistance in his heart. According to Rosalind, the powerful family he didn't want to see had a great influence in the royal capital. He just passed away so foolishly, didn't he fall into the trap? No matter how you look at it, the most stable development is to rest assured in Blue Lake City. At least you need to figure out what sets you apart as a divine ally. I know what you're worried about, but you're a chosen person by the gods. Even His Majesty the King will treat you politely. That family would never dare to do anything to you openly. In contrast, Richard appears very confident. In the kingdom of stars, it is ultimately up to the people of their star-moon sect to decide. It's hard to say who is bigger, the king or the pope, but the will of the goddess is absolutely irresistible. Richard's words were very beautiful and confident, but the more so, the more uncertain Li Xun's heart became. After all, it's not him who's going to the capital anyway. He has recorded the merits of the appearance of divine relatives in the area under his jurisdiction. As for what happened to this divine relative in the future, Li Xun was not his disciple. No matter what happened to this divine relative, good or bad, it had nothing to do with him. As for what kind of deity's authority cannot be violated, just listen to it and see from the previous selection ceremony. Li Xun did not see any traces of piety on those divine attendants. In such a solemn place as the audience hall, there was a direct argument. You should know that the gods have always been watching there. It is said that imperial power does not go to the countryside, let alone the elusive divine power. This deity has such a gentle personality, is so easy to talk about, and works hard every day for the great goal of eternal happiness of all beings. He probably won't care about these trivial matters, and he definitely hasn't taken the initiative to impose divine punishment or anything like that. A divine selection ceremony is held every 3 years. Although not every divine selection ceremony gives birth to divine relatives, the number of divine relatives in the entire star kingdom is not too many, and it is definitely not many. Conservatively estimated, there are at least 50 or more divine relatives. Li Xun would not naively believe that there is a close relationship between the divine relatives and the divine relatives, just like a family. There must also be corresponding factions among the divine relatives, and these guys are all religious fanatics. It can be imagined that their identity as a sinner will not be welcomed by them. Even compared to that privileged family, some divine relatives may want to kill themselves more. Li Xun let out a sigh, appearing quite worried, and suddenly felt that his future was bleak. He has already left the church with Rosalind, and Richard said he only has half a month at most. After half a month, he must set off to meet the Pope in the capital. Although the other party spoke in a friendly tone, the attitude revealed was completely unacceptable to Li Xun. Fortunately, there is still a half-month buffer period, and he will not go to the capital without knowing anything. He still has time to understand the situation in the capital and study the power he currently possesses. The original owner was basically an autistic child who had not stepped out of the orphanage several times in 18 years, and had no complete knowledge of the world. Li Xun only knew that the civilization of this world was similar to that of 18th-century Europe, because there were real deities and supernatural powers, and the technology tree was also somewhat crooked. There are gods who control lightning, but electrical energy has not been developed, perhaps because it is the power of gods, a noble power, so it cannot be used casually by mortals. Instead, various steam mechanisms are used. As the saying goes, the essence of human beings is to boil water, and the boiling water technique in this world is also very advanced. Outside Blue Lake City, the lush grass stretches across the sky. Rosalind's orphanage is not located in the city. After all, the land prices inside the city are expensive. Initially, she chose to cultivate wasteland outside the city to be self-sufficient. In front of me is a farmhouse-style building with arable land and pastures, full of poetic and picturesque pastoral atmosphere. Standing between a golden wheat field, Li Xun sighed in his heart. Isn't everything in front of him the life he once dreamed of? Walking to the estate, Rosalind and Li Xun were warmly welcomed, and several girls dressed in nun robes walked out, chattering around them. Lord Rosalind is back. Lord Rosalind, you must have succeeded this time. Lord Rosalind, have you become a divine benefactor? Looking at the hopeful expressions on their faces and listening to their words, Rosalind also appeared a bit awkward. As soon as he thought that this was the 5th time a similar scene had happened, Li Xun couldn't help but feel a bit amused. It wasn't until Rosalind gave him a slightly embarrassed glare that he restrained himself. I'm sorry for letting you down. I think I haven't done well enough and haven't received the goddess's recognition yet. Several nuns looked at Rosalind's forced smile and silently lowered their heads, then leaned over to comfort her in a low voice. Li Xun, who was following behind, shook his head somewhat helplessly. In fact, he could see that Rosalind was no longer very concerned about this matter. After all, she had failed 5 times in a row, which could be considered a habit, and her psychological quality was strong enough. But your discussion, as a consolation, isn't it just adding salt to the wound? Although I did not become a divine companion, I found myself a divine companion, which shows that the goddess also believes that everything I did back then was right. This child has never been a sinner. At that time, Rosalind, who had a promising future, offended many people because of her relationship with Li Xun. Even though she has never been able to become a divine companion, some people say it's Li Xun's relationship. Because he blessed sinners, he was punished by the goddess. Now, Li Xun has become a divine companion, which indicates that everything she did before was correct and affirmed by the goddess. It was precisely because of this that Rosalind let go of her obsession in her heart. She realized that she had actually been recognized by the goddess, and was the identity of the divine companion really that important? Hey! Has he become a divine companion? Several nuns were stunned and then looked at Li Xun with some surprise. The atmosphere was a bit awkward for a moment, and it was obvious that these nuns who took care of the orphanage children did not have a very close relationship with Li Xun. Most of the people who come to work in this orphanage are followers of Rosalind. In their eyes, Li Xun was undoubtedly the culprit behind Rosalind's fate. Although not hostile to the other party, it is clearly not possible to get too close. Isn't it just that? He stole Lord Rosalind's. A young nun spoke foolishly and was then slapped hard by an older nun beside her. The girl showed a pitiful expression and looked at the serious-looking nun beside her. Her name is Karina, and she is the second in command in the orphanage. She has taken over many orphanage-related matters on behalf of Rosalind. She is not only responsible for taking care of the many children in the orphanage, but also for leading these little nuns to practice, so that they are not too unruly. The children in the orphanage affectionately refer to her as Karina's mother. Don't judge the gods' decisions recklessly, this is a manifestation of arrogance. After teaching the tearful little nun a lesson, Karina also bent down towards Li Xun. Please forgive her rudeness, Lord Goddess. I believe the goddess has chosen you as her benefactor, and naturally has the profound meaning behind her actions. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. That's called blessings. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. That's called blessings. Well, actually I don't know exactly where that goddess has chosen me. Li Xun blinked. Perhaps someone else had been chosen because they were devout enough in their faith. As for him, he was now in a state of being completely surrounded. Watching Karina apologize to the little nun by pressing her head, he immediately stopped her. I know we may have had some unpleasant experiences in the past, and many people have had some misunderstandings about me. But that's all from the past, and I hope we can get along well in the future. As for children, she doesn't have any ill intentions to say whatever comes to her mind. I think the goddess will forgive her impoliteness as well. Who is a child? I am even older than you. The little nun blinked, obviously feeling a bit dissatisfied. But it's no use not being convinced. Karina's mother's palm is still resting on her head. Although most of the time Karina's mother appears very kind, she is very serious about her faith in the goddess and cannot tolerate any carelessness. Carol, please apologize to the Lord God of the gods. I'm sorry. The little nun named Carol looked particularly pitiful with teary eyes. All right, it's all a family, and I didn't take it to heart either. Most of the little nuns in front of me have exceptionally simple thoughts, with nothing else in their hearts except for their piety towards the goddess and respect for Rosalind. Li Xun naturally wouldn't have any objections to them, after all, they are also his future family. Watching Li Xun and the nuns harmoniously getting along, Rosalind also breathed a slight sigh of relief. It seems that this child's original intention is not bad, and he did not change after gaining strength. Congratulations to you, Lord Goddess, for being recognized by the goddess and proving your nobility to everyone, proving that you are not a sinner. Sister Karina, just call me Xun in the future. This is the name I gave myself. Don't call me God's companion anymore, it sounds strange. Due to a change in identity, the nuns naturally referred to Li Xun as a divine companion. After Li Xun introduced himself in this way, their names changed, but they didn't change either. They shouted out one by one. Master Xun is a goddess's companion. If we don't respect you, wouldn't it be disrespectful to the goddess? Yes, we can't be disrespectful to Lord Xun like Carol. Stop talking, Carol is really going to cry. Li Xun looked at the devout little nuns in front of him with some amusement. They clenched their fists against their chests, making a prayer gesture, and looked at Li Xun with a hopeful expression in their eyes. For these little nuns who always prioritize their faith, Li Xun at this moment is like an incarnation of a deity. So naive, it must be easy to deceive. Li Xun blinked and looked at the young nuns in front of him, who were only a few years older than him. He remembered that these nuns had just come here to work 3 months ago. There are several churches in Blue Lake City, and the largest one is managed by Priest Richard. To become a formal nun, one must undergo strict assessment. After passing the assessment and becoming a formal nun, these nuns will be assigned to various churches in Blue Lake City. Being able to stay in a church in the city is naturally a good job, and almost always stationed in some villages outside the city. Only Rosalind's place was an accident because there was always a shortage of people, so if you don't follow the arrangements, you can also choose to work at Rosalind's place. Of course, choosing to come to Rosalind basically leaves no future to speak of. There is also a way for nuns to rise, and those who perform well can go to work at the Blue Lake City Cathedral, while those who perform well at the Blue Lake City Cathedral have the opportunity to work at the bustling city's cathedral near the capital city. The example of transitioning from a nun to a priest and then taking charge of a cathedral is not without it. The only advantage of Rosalind here is probably that there are not so many rules anymore. Being a nun requires following many rules, especially for young girls who have just become nuns. When encountering older nuns with strange temperaments, they inevitably face various difficulties, even physical punishment. Karina is very stable, powerful, and highly trusted by Rosalind. Naturally, she would not do such a thing. With her as a role model, the little nuns in the orphanage have also made rapid progress, at least not so detached. Li Xun thought this way, seeing a certain role model staring at him with bright eyes. "Can I give you a hug, Mr. Sun?" Li Xun didn't react for a while, but Karina had already rudely embraced him into her arms. I want to feel some of the goddess's breath. Could you please be a little reserved and not make strange noises like a crazy girl? Don't touch me with your hands or press my head, I won't be able to breathe anymore. Li Xun looked a bit helpless, struggling to break free from the soft jade and snow that almost covered his entire face. He realized that beneath Karina's steady exterior was a fanatical belief similar to Rosalind's. Can we also touch and find adults? This is a divine companion. Maybe after touching it, we will also receive the goddess's gaze. Let me touch it too. With Karina as a model, the other nuns were also a bit impatient. Their eyes sparkled with excitement and then rushed towards Li Xun. For a moment, the situation became somewhat out of control, and Li Xun was covered in cute girls, putting a lot of pressure. With Rosalind's help, he finally got rid of these incredibly enthusiastic nuns. Hiding in Rosalind's small courtyard, looking back, I found that Fang Zheng was staring at me with a complex expression. So, does Rosalind's mother also want to hug her? If it were you, I could sacrifice myself a little more. Who wants to hug you? Also, they said not to call me by this name in front of so many people. I mean, you can shout in private. Where is it in private? There are so many people outside. Rosalind appeared somewhat helpless, feeling that Karina was more suitable for the role of a mother. After all, compared to herself, she was more loved by the children. However, it seemed that Li Xun had no intention of Karina in that regard, and he still used the formal title of Sister Karina. All right, let's all go back. Lord Sun won't run away. If you want to touch him, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. Outside the door, Karina's voice rang out, while Li Xun couldn't help but twitch his lips. Sister Karina, your speech sounds very dangerous as a nun. Isn't it necessary to maintain purity and embrace men in a certain way? Oh yes, I am now a divine companion, representing the goddess on earth. It is not impure for nuns to come into contact with him, that is called blessings. TSK, this world of divine supremacy is really too dark. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Be careful of the witch. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Be careful of the witch. The place where Li Xun is currently located is where Rosalind lives, and it is also a sacred place like an orphanage. He is still here for the first time and is curiously looking around at the environment. The small courtyard is filled with various flowers and plants, and the colors of red, green, and green make the entire courtyard look lively. At the corner of the wall, there is a small area enclosed by a fence, where several strange small grasses are planted. These grasses emit a silver-white glow, and their beautiful colors are like the stars in the night sky. Next to these small grasses, there is a sign that reads very thoughtfully, "Star moon grass has certain toxicity, please do not touch it casually." Li Xun just glanced at it and turned his head around feeling a bit guilty. He suddenly remembered that he had stolen the starry moon grass here last night and then committed suicide by swallowing the grass. I don't know. Rosalind didn't realize that her grass had been pulled away. It was obvious that Rosalind's attention did not stop on the starry moon grass. She took Li Xun's hand and led him towards the inner room. The rooms inside were arranged as a small church, and a statue of the goddess of the stars and moon was enshrined on the central altar, but it was a scaled-down version. At first glance, Li Xun was attracted by the statue, and he could feel that it contained a special power. Obviously, this was not an ordinary statue, but rather, it was illuminated. Rosalind walked forward and first lit the incense made of starry and moongrass, then dripped some holy water for the ritual onto her and Li Xun's fingertips. Then she knelt down with him in front of the goddess's statue. "Come and pray to the goddess with me. We haven't just returned from the cathedral, you've been kneeling there for several hours." Looking at the pious Rosalind, Li Xun wanted to make such a roast. However, considering that I am now covered by this goddess, it's better to show some piety and bow more to the other person. After all, it's not an exaggeration to say that one's current situation is full of setbacks. Kneeling down on the futon with Rosalind, Li Xun silently prayed with his hands clasped together, with a devout expression on his face, without picking out any flaws. After a moment of prayer, Li Xun felt a divine force pouring into his body from the statue in front of him. This force seemed to strengthen his body, and he felt a warm and comfortable sensation all over, as if there was an inexhaustible force in his body. Not only that, I found that my already extremely active spiritual power became more and more acute, as if it had become an extension of his body, observing the situation around his body. Despite closing his eyes, everything inside the church was clearly presented to him. Like a child who had received a new toy, Li Xun curiously mobilized his spiritual energy and touched everything in the church. Finally, all of his mental energy was focused on Rosalind. Compared to visual observation, the spiritual observation was clearly more detailed. Rosalind's perfect body curve was also vividly displayed in front of Li Xun. The woman's feedback was very wonderful, as if something was attracting him from the other person. After calming down, Li Xun observed more carefully. The wonderful attraction seemed to come from behind the woman, and he felt that the nun's dress on her body was somewhat obstructing. He tried to penetrate it. After all, it's spiritual power, and achieving this kind of thing should also be easy. Then he saw a scene of white flowers, and before he could fully appreciate it, he felt as if he had bumped into a wall, his eyes darkened, and he felt dizzy and dizzy. Don't use your mental power to pry into others' bodies casually. This is very impolite behavior and may even be seen as provocation. Rosalind's voice sounded on the side, and the woman's tone was gentle, as if teaching an immature child, as if she didn't feel shy or angry about Li Xun's behavior at all. She still maintained a praying posture, not even opening her eyes, and her whole body emitted a holy light, making Li Xun feel somewhat ashamed. "Goddess, please forgive my sins. I was only momentarily immersed in exploring the power you bestowed upon me, without any intention of blasphemy towards her." Li Xun had a profound reflection, and then he felt that the force that poured into his body seemed to have increased again. Are all the divine beings in this world so unreasonable? The silence lasted in the church for a period of time, until Rosalind opened her eyes and ended her prayer. You should have already felt it, this is the power you possess as a divine being. The more devout you become, the stronger the power bestowed upon you by the gods will become, making your strength even stronger. Is it that simple? That's right, this is the gift and favor of the gods. The divine attendants are the embodiment of the gods' will and the shadow of the gods walking in the world. As long as they continue to pray devoutly to the gods, they can constantly become stronger. Rosalind said this, looking at Li Xun with envy in her eyes. However, soon her gaze narrowed and she lowered her head to calm her restless inner self. What I am pursuing has never been a powerful force, what I am pursuing and serving will always be the glory of a goddess. I am not jealous of this child, I am just delighted that his presence will spread the glory of the goddess even further. So how can ordinary people obtain extraordinary power? Can the geniuses among ordinary people achieve the speed of divine beings' cultivation? The idea that divine beings can constantly become stronger by praying may seem absurd, but considering the harsh birth conditions, it seems normal. It is uncertain which one is rarer, whether it is a divine companion or a cultivation genius. There is no such thing as a cultivation genius. We mortals are born with no connection to being extraordinary. We have no talent in cultivation at all. In this world, the vast majority of people are just ordinary people. However, Rosalind shook her head and gave Li Xun a completely unexpected answer. Originally, you didn't have the opportunity to come into contact with these things, but now you have become a divine being and are destined to deal with various supernatural powers in the future, so I must also inform you of some taboos in advance. Looking at Rosalind's serious demeanor, Li Xun couldn't help but sit up straight and make a serious listening gesture. Any use of power comes at a cost, and any pursuit of power is a blasphemy, except for the gift of the gods. As a divine being, your power depends on your piety towards the gods. Don't get lost in the pursuit of power, remember that what you serve is always the glory of our Lord. Finally, be careful of the witches. Witches are the natural enemies of divine beings, and their power will cause great restraint on them. At the same time, they are constantly chasing the light and shadow of the gods, devouring all miracles bestowed by the gods. It can be said that once you become a divine being, you have been blessed by the witches. The danger of women coming to your door. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. The gaze of the gods is not without reason. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. The gaze of the gods is not without reason. Be careful of the witch. Although he has only a partial understanding of the world, he can't be more familiar with the phrase, be careful of the witch. The witch is the embodiment of disaster and a heretic who disrespects the gods. Legend has it that there have been many disasters of witches in this world, each of which has a wide impact and caused huge casualties. This is a widely circulated fairy tale in the world, and most people were scared by their parents when they were young, using phrases like, if you don't sleep anymore, you will be taken away by a witch. Among the various stories about witches, the most famous one is none other than the original witch. It is said that she was the first witch in this world and was once the most devout saint of the gods. She fell because she coveted the power of the gods, was cursed by the gods and turned into a witch, and was ultimately killed by the gods. Although she died, this curse has been passed down, to the extent that after her, the witch has been continuously born. Not only that, but also many witch worshippers gathered together to establish a cult. Compared to some strange and unknown evil gods, the witch cult is the largest black and evil force in the world today. Although it may not seem like a good idea as a divine relative, Li Xun still felt that in this matter, the gods were definitely not as majestic and upright as they appeared on the surface. 5,000 years ago, the gods did not have as strong control over this continent, and at that time, there were still many unbelievers. Nowadays, almost all countries and their residents believe in gods. Believing in gods has become a very normal thing. Although those without faith may not be persecuted as heretics, it is obvious that they will be excluded and despised by believers, and life will not be easy. Even if it's pretend to be a believer. Probably nothing more than another story written by a winner, right? Even a little more conspiracy theory, all of this is completely directed and acted upon by the gods, in order to develop believers. Well, of course, her own goddess has such lofty ideals, she definitely wouldn't do such a thing. The statue of the goddess of the stars and moon was right in front of him. He even said that he had just received the power bestowed upon him by the other party, but now he is speaking ill of them. Li Xun still feels a bit guilty. Glancing at the statue in front of him, Li Xun clasped his hands and bowed, thinking mentally that his goddess pattern was so large that he would not blame himself for such a small matter. With this thought in mind, Li Xun then felt a divine force surge into his body, and this time the weight was even greater than the previous two. Is this okay too? Li Xun was stunned for a moment, then asked Rosalind with a strange expression beside him. The more devout the divine relatives are to the gods, the stronger their strength will be, right? That's right, the gods not only bestow power but also knowledge, and the growth rate of every divine being is beyond imagination. Now, the Holy See's Highness, who has been a divine being for only 20 years, has already possessed strength comparable to that of angels on earth. Rosalind said this, and then couldn't help but let out a sigh. She still remembers the girl who once followed behind her with a look of admiration. In the blink of an eye, she became a towering saint, and herself with this thought in mind, Rosalind suddenly looked at Li Xun in front of her in a daze. This was already the second one. Does it mean that people who are related to her are more likely to become divine beings? I think you may have made a mistake somewhere. Perhaps the gods are not interested in whether you are devout, but in whether you are honest. After thinking for a moment, Li Xun still didn't say anything like that. If he wants to survive well in this world, then he must play his role well. After all, he still carries the identity of a sinner. If you say some strange things at this time, you may be caught writing articles. No matter what you think, my loyalty to the goddess can be seen from heaven and earth, and the sun and moon can be seen. Dare to question me, that's questioning the goddess. You have stepped into this dangerous world and will face many unimaginable dangers from now on. Remember, compared to stronger power, what is more needed is perseverance, and a devout faith in the goddess will be the most solid foundation for you to stand in this dangerous world. The aura of a witch can drive people crazy, and the babbling of an evil god can lead to corruption. After all, you have been involved in an evil god incident before, and we have not been able to investigate the specific origin of that evil god. You are likely to still be watched by the other party. Be wary of the calls from the darkness and not get lost in it. It's been so many years now, shouldn't there be any problem? Li Xun appeared somewhat helpless, as he had a difficult fate. Not only were there many ill-intentioned people staring at him, but there were even evil gods in the dark. Unfortunately, after investigating the scene, we found that the blood sacrifice was not initiated by them. At least they were not crazy enough to sacrifice themselves to evil gods. At the beginning, the sacrifice should have been just a few slaves, but later on, we don't know what happened. They started fighting each other, using their nails, teeth, and in cruel ways that humans cannot imagine. The scene was covered in blood, only twisted flesh, and no one except you survived. Rosalind spoke slowly, as if telling a horror story, and Li Xun was covered in hair as she listened. After all, he himself is the only survivor in this horror story. According to the nature of the horror film, the survivor of the first part must be the first one in the second part to be used for flag worship. We don't know what that unknown existence has done, we only know that it has received its own sacrifice. When it receives the sacrifice, it will respond. Evil gods are twisted and corrupt beings, and their responses mostly contain malice towards humanity. So far, no one knows what that existence has responded to. It seemed that Li Xun's expression was somewhat intimidating, and Rosalind smiled to comfort her. Of course, you don't have to be too nervous either, after all, you are now a goddess's lover, and under the gaze of the gods, all evil has nowhere to hide. But there are many relatives of the gods, right? The gods are also very busy, so it's impossible to keep an eye on every one of their relatives, right? Li Xun felt a bit uneasy. His own deity was currently struggling for the great ideal of happiness for all humanity, and he was too busy to care so much. At least in this church, you are absolutely safe. When danger comes, your spirit will also give you a warning. Don't ignore any sudden inspiration. If you feel something is wrong, immediately go to the nearest church nearby. The scope of the church is like a goddess's kingdom, which can isolate all pollution and impurity. Is it really reliable? Li Xun was just about to ask this question, and then a soft smile from a woman rang in his ear. He suddenly felt a surge of excitement, feeling a bit creepy. The laughter was so close, as if someone was lying behind him, pressing against his ear. However, in this small church, besides him, only Rosalind is left. The statue of the goddess placed on the altar still sparkles with a warm light, and some noble power lingers on it, as if it were Rosalind's words, isolating all pollution and impurity. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. What about the cost? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. What about the cost? Li Xun turned around fiercely, causing the white curtains on both sides to shake. The name Star and Moon Goddess seems to symbolize the light and the darkness, so her power has nothing to do with the darkness, and the two are even hostile. Therefore, most church decorations are in white, silver, and gold tones. This color tone also reflects the level of the clergy of the Star and Moon cult, such as Rosalind, whose decorations here are mostly white, and the clothing of her and the nuns here is also mostly white. Behind me was a tightly closed door, and the laughter in my ears seemed like a distant illusion. Rosalind. Did you hear anything? It's normal to hear sound, no need to panic. It's a revelation from the goddess and also a test for you. The existence of gods is not something we can imagine, and the fragile human spirit cannot bear the direct gifts from the gods. These chaotic and blurry scenes, intermittent sounds, are actually full of symbolic significance. They are the truth that the gods tell you, and you need to understand and distinguish them yourself. Rosalind was not alarmed by Li Xun's reaction, but instead told him with a gentle expression that this was a normal situation. Are you sure? Evil gods can also influence me like this. How can I distinguish whether this is the revelation of the goddess or the nonsense of the evil gods? Li Xun thought the sound he heard was an illusion, but Rosalind told him it was a normal situation. So the question came, what does this laughter suggest? He only felt that the laughter was not very serious, completely different from the gentle and sacred feeling that the goddess had given him at the beginning. This laughter mesmerized his bones, giving him a sense of decadence. I can only say that trust your own intuition, your spirit will help you distinguish between malice and danger. Our spirit is both strong and fragile, and the process of forging spiritual strength may encounter various accidents. There are countless pollutants hidden in the darkness, so there are also many crazy people, so preparation before cultivation is particularly important. Of course, you are now under the gaze of the goddess. My small church is of the same level as the Blue Lake City Cathedral in terms of specifications. Here, your spirit will be blessed by the goddess, so there is no need to worry about such things. The strange sounds you hear must be the inspiration given to you by the goddess. Just have a good understanding. So, is our goddess really reliable? With such thoughts in mind, Li Xun knelt down again in front of the statue of the goddess of the stars and moon. However, not long after he had just regained his concentration, laughter rang out again, and the sound pressed against his ear, constantly teasing his mind and making it difficult for him to concentrate. Hypocrisy. Until the seductive laughter suddenly turned into resentful curses, Li Xun was pleasantly surprised. He turned back once again, but his back was still empty. So, is this really a revelation, goddess? Are you okay? There's dirt in your room, open your eyes and take a look. The light on the goddess statue remained gentle, and the eerie voice of the woman also disappeared. It seems to have worked, but it doesn't seem to have worked. I've seen a ghost. Li Xun hesitated a bit, unsure whether to tell Rosalind about this matter. It's not that I don't trust the other person, but it doesn't seem meaningful to tell them. After all, she had just made a firm statement that there would never be any problems in the church or under the statue of the goddess. Perhaps, is this really just some kind of inspiration? Li Xun fell into deep contemplation. After all, he did not feel any malice. No matter what the voice was, the other party seemed to have no intention of harming him. He began to contemplate the possible meaning behind the laughter, while Rosalind talked about various precautions for the extraordinary world on the side. Due to some absent-minded relationships, Li Xun did not listen too clearly, only remembering the sentence added after each introduction. This is for the general transcendent, so there's no need to worry about it for those who are divine. So, the divine relatives are completely free from taboos, right? Finally, Li Xun could not help but start roast and interrupt Rosalind's introduction. Yes, this is the person who is favored by the gods. From the moment you are watched by the gods, you have already embarked on a completely different path than us. How does an ordinary superhero use extraordinary power to solve it, and what is the so-called cost? Li Xun looked curious, while Rosalind let out a sigh and slowly untied her nun uniform. Wait a moment. What are you doing? Have a good conversation, what are you taking off? Li Xun looked a bit awkward, but in order to show respect for Rosalind, he still widened his eyes. However, Rosalind turned her back in front of him, only revealing her smooth back to him. I don't want to see the plains, I want to see Mount Everest. Before he could show a regretful expression on his face, Li Xun's attention was drawn to the few feathers on Rosalind's back. Rosalind has 6 pure white feathers on her back, which are flat against the woman's back, covering her body and almost blending with her skin. What is this? Subconsciously reaching out her hand and gently caressing it, Rosalind's body trembled for a moment, and then she pulled up her nun robe as usual, covering Miamon's body. As you can see, this is the price of becoming a transcendent. I transplanted an organ from a transcendent creature in order to gain power that does not belong to me. This is a path of blasphemy, but the goddess was kind and tacitly allowed us to do so. Li Xun didn't know what to say, while Rosalind lowered her head and seemed to be feeling a bit down. It is obvious to her that her own characteristics are a symbol of impurity, perhaps that is why she has never been able to become a goddess. She, who embarked on the path of blasphemy due to her pursuit of power, can no longer receive the grace of the goddess. Li Xun scratched his head on the side. He wanted to say something to comfort the other person, but he didn't know what to say. After a long silence, he finally held back 4 words. It's quite beautiful. What nonsense are you talking about? Rosalind, who had finished organizing her clothes, gave the young man in front of her a look of displeasure, while the latter continued speaking with a serious expression on her face. I'm serious, can I take a closer look? I didn't see it clearly just now. What else do you want to see? Rao, the usually calm and steady Rosalind, couldn't help but spit out Li Xun's teasing words, appearing a bit embarrassed. If it weren't for knowing that this child wasn't that frivolous person, she would have had to give him a good lesson. End of this chapter.